Krishnaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Kiramene Krishna Krishnaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Kiramene Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharini Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Ashtapadishtatani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharini Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Radharika Bhaktivedanta Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Radharika Bhaktivedanta Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Tanishka. Prabhuji has also come. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Danda Pranam, Prabhuji. Please take my humble obeisances. Yes. Welcome. See you back. So nice to see you again, Prabhuji.
Thank you.
Lockdown is extended, so is our good fortune.
No, is my good fortune have opportunity to have your association, everyone's association here. It's been another interesting week, huh? In India.
Yes, Prabhuji. Yes.
And our lockdown goes on here in Vrindavan. We're, I guess, similar to you, we're in a lockdown mode. But everything is going on. Everything's going on nicely, and even the weather has been nice.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Yes. So let's see. For this evening, I was going to talk about Prabhupada in Vrindavan.
Oh, yeah, very nice.
Since of course we're here in Vrindavan, and
Yes,
of course very nice time. We just had our Chandan Yatra, and that only a few devotees living at the temple got to take part in, but nonetheless,
Yes.
these things are going on. So it was actually when I became Prabhupada's servant, personal servant, 1972, just at the end of Janmashtami time. Srila Prabhupada came to New Vrindavan for Janmashtami. He came there in 1970. 1971, he didn't attend, but then he went there again 1974. Well, he went 1972 and 1974. So it became one of the places he would go to, and because it was a large farm, many devotees could come from all over the country, so there would be a few hundred devotees there. So I started out as a New Vrindavan devotee. Actually, I was from a big city, Philadelphia, in the USA, which is close to New York City. It was like 5 million, population of 5 million at the time. But when I moved into a temple, I very quickly wound up in New Vrindavan by Kirtanananda Swami's coaxing, myself and one godbrother. So when Prabhupada came to New Vrindavan in 1972, I had been living in the temple then for 16 months. And when he came to New Vrindavan, his servant had just left him. His servant was with him for about a year, a little over a year. And when Prabhupada came there, he didn't have a servant. I wasn't aware of this. I was just cooking in the kitchen. But as it turned out, due to Kirtanananda's association with Prabhupada and being with Prabhupada from the very beginning, he knew all, we say, the ins and outs of Prabhupada's lifestyle, his having a personal servant. And so I left with Prabhupada when Prabhupada left New Vrindavan just after Janmashtami festival. And from that time, so that was the beginning of September 1972. So as soon as I joined Prabhupada and started traveling with him, he spoke about coming to Vrindavan, India, for Kartik. And I was young. I was just 21 years old and living in the temple for a short time, just for over a year. So at that time, was not even very aware of what Kartik was, and certainly had no idea what it was to travel. I had never been on an airplane before. I was just grew up in the city. But as soon as we got on the airplane first time, and as I said, Prabhupada, he would always sit at the window seat. When Prabhupada traveled by air, his seat was always at the window, and his servant was always right next to him. And then if there was a third seat, then his secretary would be there. And of course, in those days, flights weren't always so full. So as soon as the plane would take off, if there were extra seats, sometimes we would move over. I would move over one seat, secretary would go behind like that, so Prabhupada had more room. But on this particular flight, I remember because Prabhupada had sitting next to me and he looked at me and he said, so we're going to Vrindavan for Kartik. And this was going to be the first time since 1965 when Prabhupada left India. This would be the first time that he was going to be in Vrindavan for the entire month of Kartik. And he was very excited about the idea. He was very happy. Of course, Prabhupada, as he said, Vrindavan was his home. Later on, he said Juhu was his place of business and Mayapur was his place of worship, but Vrindavan was his home. And we know Prabhupada also said that he felt very at home in Vrindavan. He said he was very comfortable. He had two very small rooms at Radha Damodar Temple. Those of you, I'm sure many of you have seen those rooms. Very simple, very small. But he said he was very comfortable there. He liked being at Radha Damodar Temple there with the deities. And of course, from where he would do his translating work, he could see Srila Rupa Goswami's Bhajan Kutir and the Samadhi. And from that point, he became, of course, he was very inspired by Srila Rupa Goswami. He said in that trip, well, when we later got there for Kartik, Prabhupada said that his rooms, he said, in Vrindavan were the very center of the spiritual world. Actually said that they were the hub of the wheel of the spiritual world. He said because the Krishna consciousness movement began in those rooms, he said, by the inspiration of Srila Rupa Goswami. So on this plane that day, he said, when we get to Vrindavan, he said, I'll be giving classes on nectar of devotion. He said, and you, he said, you can read, talking to me. He said, you will read, he said, from the book. He said, and sometimes I'll stop you and I'll give commentary. Of course, the Nectar of Devotion itself is Prabhupada's commentary on Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. He said that Nectar of Devotion was just 476 pages. He said because it's a, he said it was just, what do you call?
Summary study.
Summary study, thank you. He said it was summary study. He said otherwise every verse would make it over 1,000 pages. So he said, you read, he said, then I'll stop you and I'll give commentary. So now this was 1 month before he was even arriving in Vrindavan. So Prabhupada was very conscious of what he was doing. He had a plan. You know, he didn't just go in there, wasn't a spontaneous thing. He knew just what he wanted to do. And he also understood he was going to have, at this time in Vrindavan, Radha Damodar Temple, this was a big festival. Big festival means there were about 40 Westerners there, 40 of his disciples, mostly from the US and from England. Many were from England as well. So, but he had this plan, and he was, I could understand, he was eager to show the Vrindavan, the Goswamis, the Smarta Brahmanas, what he had done, how he had turned these Westerners, had these Western young boys and girls into Vaishnavas. And Prabhupada saw that this was the success of Lord Chaitanya's movement, the success of chanting Hare Krishna, the success of his spiritual master's desire, Bhaktivedanta Thakur's desire, that these things were going to happen. Said at that time in India, no one really thought that even Lord Chaitanya's words that the holy names would be spread to every town and village. No one really considered that that was going to happen. They just thought it was some nice poetry. But Prabhupada took it as a fact. One thing I learned being with Prabhupada is whatever he saw in Shastra, that was a fact. There was no compromising. He was convinced. So now he had actually done it. He had successfully spread Krishna consciousness around the world, and he wanted everyone to see. He particularly wanted them to see in Vrindavan what he had done. And this festival was going to help him do that. One of the things he did when he got there, of course, was he had on the night of Rasa Yatra, he had a fire sacrifice. He had a yajna in which he gave some devotees first initiation, he gave second initiation, and he even initiated some sannyasis. I believe at that time Satsvarup Maharaj, Rupanuga Prabhu, Guru Kripa, Yashodanandan, and two others were all given sannyas initiation at this time in Vrindavan during Kartik. So it was a very, very special what Prabhupada was doing. And he was proud. Prabhupada was proud of his Western, as he would say, his dancing white elephants. He was proud of his disciples. And he would tell them in the lectures, sometimes there during Kartik, and afterwards he went to Mumbai. They had the big Cross Maidan festival. There was a big festival in Hyderabad that went on for a week. There was a festival in Ahmedabad that went on for a week. And all these festivals had thousands of people attending. And much of what Prabhupada wanted them to see were his Western disciples, because he understood that the Indians were so much eager to be like Westerners. So he wanted to show them these Westerners, as he would say. They've come from wealthy families. They've given up money. They've given up their college education. They've given up their degrees. He would point out Hayagriva, he's professor, English professor. Brahmananda was English major, like that, had his master's in English. So Prabhupada wanted the Indians to see that these Americans that you're so much eager to become like are giving up all these things to become Hare Krishnas, to become devotees. So also as we were headed towards Vrindavan, so we left New Vrindavan around September 10th. So now that made about 5 weeks before Prabhupada would arrive right in Vrindavan, right at Radha Damodar temple on the very first day of Kartik. And as we got about halfway there, he stopped on the way. Prabhupada stopped in Pittsburgh for 1 day, then he stopped in Dallas for 3 days. These places are where I began to learn how to be Prabhupada's servant. As I've said many times, there was no handbook on becoming a servant. Now we have, you go to our course, we go to Mayapur, we have the ILS meetings. We have handbooks for everything. How to become a disciple, how to become guru, how to become GBC. They have GBC training courses now. Everything we're training, how to chant japa properly, how to be Vaishnavi properly. Everything we have training courses. But at that time, there was no, you moved into the temple and you began doing your service. That was our training. So even as Prabhupada's servant, I really had no idea what to do. It was Prabhupada himself showed me how to use the cooker. He would day by day show me how he liked massage, different things. One day, even as I was massaging him, he grabbed my leg and started squeezing it. Didn't even give me a warning. He just grabbed my leg. I jumped up in the air as he grabbed my leg and said, like this. So these were the first days with Prabhupada. So then we stayed in Los Angeles for a few weeks. And then, of course, he went to Hawaii for a few days. And then he went to Bangkok, Thailand. Another place there in Southeast Asia. He stayed in hotels. And this was one thing Prabhupada didn't very much care. Didn't like hotel rooms, motel rooms. He liked the temple. He liked to stay in any room in the temple, even if it was very, very simple. It was temple facility, so he was happy there. He didn't consider it good thing to stay in these hotels. But while we were there in Southeast Asia, he had to stay in this hotel for almost a week. And one of my senior godbrothers, Burjan, was there. Prabhupada had sent him and his wife there for preaching. So he would come to the massage, the daily massage. So one day, massage time meant it was around 11:30 in the morning, like that for an hour and a half. Prabhupada, of course, would have on his gamcha. I would have on a gamcha, and I traveled with a straw mat. And so this straw mat would be in his suitcase, traveled also all around the world. This was part of Prabhupada's paraphernalia. So one of these days, I was massaging Prabhupada's back. Prabhupada's back was his favorite place when you were giving massage. He would let you stay behind him, massage his back very, very strongly for at least half an hour. And you did it until he told you, the break, he did it until he told you to stop. This was also one of the things I learned being with Prabhupada. Everything you did was according to his desire. Even one time he said to me, after I had been with him for a year, and I had been with him so long, I considered that I knew just what I was doing. Even massage, I knew massage his head so long, massage his back so long, and his arms, his fingers, everything. So I just started doing it according to my calculation, and then I would move to the next spot. And Prabhupada had a way about him. Things generally would go 3 times. First time, second time. So first day I did it, second day I did it, and then the third day came along, and I'm massaging Prabhupada's head, sandalwood oil. Prabhupada said, keep a cool head. So I was massaging his head with sandalwood oil. This was the third day, and I took my hands down to start massaging his back. And as soon as I took my hands off his head, he said, you massage me until I tell you to stop, not until you tell you to stop. So that was the last day I massaged him according to what I thought was the proper thing to do. So being with Prabhupada was like that. You did exactly what he wanted you to do. He knew exactly what he wanted, and he expected. It was right here in Vrindavan, in his rooms, Krishna Balaram Mandir, in his sitting room. One day he rang the bell. So I went in, offered obeisances. And when you were with him, he just expected you knew what to do. So he didn't often say things to you. He could just look at you. He would just give you a look. So I would go in, offer obeisances, and sit up, and he would look at me, and then he would look at the fan. So that meant turn on the fan. Or he would look at me, and he would look over at those French doors in front of his room. So if the curtains were closed, it meant open the curtains. If they were open, it meant close the curtains. So Prabhupada was like that. He would say as much as was necessary, and if he didn't have to say anything, that was better. So the one day I was in there, and he said to me, first-class servant. He said, he does things without being asked. He said, that's first-class servant. He said, second-class servant, you ask him to do something, and he does it. He said, third-class servant, you ask him to do something, he said, and he doesn't do it, or he does it begrudgingly. Prabhupada's use of English language was always also very, very nice. He knew exactly the words. So he said, he'll do it, he says, but he does it begrudgingly. So this he said to me personally. He liked if you knew exactly what to do. Certain time of a day, you had a certain thing to do, depending on where you were. When we were in India, particularly like in Juhu, Prabhupada was staying in his flat. He was in second floor flat at that time before the temple was there. So the windows, like they are in so much of India at that time, you open the windows, there's no screens. So as soon as the sun would come up in the morning, you open the windows. And when the sun goes down, you have to close the windows. because of mosquitoes. If you don't close the windows, you turn on your light, of course it'll become filled with mosquitoes. So he liked that you knew how to do each and every little thing everywhere you were. So massaging him that day, and Gurjan is sitting in front of Prabhupada, and I'm behind him, I'm massaging his back. And Prabhupada's going to be in Vrindavan in one more week. He's going to be there for Kartik. So he's thinking about Vrindavan. He's thinking of India. He's thinking of his god brothers. He would always hear things from his god brothers, about his god brothers, things they were saying about him. Generally weren't nice things. He said they were envious. So he's looking at Burajan and he said, my god brothers criticize me. He said, they criticize me because I allow women in the temple. He said, in India, this is unheard of, to have women in the temple. He said, but from the moment I went to your country, he said, 1965, he said, the first year I was there in New York, he said, I studied the American boys and girls. He said, I studied the people, and I could understand if I was going to spread Krishna consciousness, women had to be allowed in the temple. He said, because I could see that men and women mix freely everywhere. Boys and girls, men and women, they always were together. He said there was no question of not allowing women in the temple. He said, but my god brothers, again, he said, but my god brothers, they criticize me for this. And then he said, but in India, when they have big festivals, he says, who comes to the temple? He said, who comes to the mandir? He said, women, so many widows. He said, in Mayapur, filled with widows. He said, but me, they criticize. He said, but because I made that adjustment to allow women, he said, I made that adjustment. He said, therefore, we're successful. So I had just been with Prabhupada at this time, just 1 month. And it was my first question I ever asked him. So I'm massaging and I'm listening. And when he stopped talking, I said, Prabhupada, I said, how do we know the difference between making an adjustment and changing a principle? And then it became quiet. After a little time, Prabhupada, again, I'm behind him, rubbing his back. I'm just doing my service. And then he just said, that requires a little intelligence. But this was Prabhupada understood just what he had to do. And he understood Krishna consciousness was for everyone. Of course, he said, and what his next step was, that men and women, they had to get married. If they were going to be together, then they had to become married. So that was also part of it. And of course, so many things he would adjust as time went on, as he saw the necessity. But this was Prabhupada's brilliance, his innovation, is how to spread Krishna consciousness all around the world according to time and place, different cultures, different age groups. We know when he first went to America, he was going to Dr. Mishra's ashram. They were all people in their 50s, people 60, 50 years old, just like Dr. Mishra himself. So he was also preaching in that way. But it was the youth that came to Srila Prabhupada later on when he was chanting in Tompkins Square Park. So then he made arrangements in that way. So then finally, Prabhupada arrived in Vrindavan. And everything was timed, so he arrived the very first day was the first day of Kartik. And even though he was getting letters, he would get letters from Mayapur, he was getting letters, of course, from Juhu. At that time, there was a big struggle going on in Juhu because of Mr. Nair. And Prabhupada was very much concerned about that. And he also knew that only he could fix it. His Western disciples, they didn't know how to deal with Indians very well, especially in legal matters. They struggled. Even though they tried so much, they generally came up short. But Prabhupada was determined to stay in Vrindavan, and he even wrote letters in that way saying, I'm in Vrindavan for the month of Kartik. So he was very eager to do that, to stay in Vrindavan for Kartik. Later on, of course, he was eager for his disciples. Once he established temples in Vrindavan, in Mayapur, he wanted that his disciples went to Vrindavan for Kartik. They went to Mayapur for Gur Purnima for their inspiration, to become purified, to chant, to hear from the devotees, to hear from advanced devotees, and then go back to their homes and preach with strength, more vigorously. This was Prabhupada's method. So this was one of the very first festivals in this way. He was there in 71, of course, but they didn't have a festival like this. This was Kartik festival. This was first Kartik festival. And the devotees, of course, there was no ISKCON property to stay on. They stayed at Fogel Ashram. And of course, Keshigat, what they call Keshigat Palace, but it wasn't a palace. It wasn't a palatial place. It was run down. It was a run-down palace. But the devotees, they stayed in these places. And every evening they would come to class. During the day, they struggled to eat nicely, struggled to keep healthy, just get their laundry done. At that time, of course, they would bathe in the Jamuna. Prabhupada warned the devotees, he said, be careful, you jump in the Jamuna that you don't hit a turtle. So there were turtles in the water at that time, snapping turtles, they could bite you. But the water was so nice, turtles were in the water. Of course, maybe there's a few back there now. There haven't been there for many, many years. But of course, we can't go to the Jamuna now, so I don't know. We're locked down. And then Prabhupada would give these classes in the evening. And during the day, basically the temple, Radha Damodar temple, was empty, just Prabhupada staying there. I was sitting on the veranda. I would hear the banging of the gong many times a day for their Artik ceremonies. But one day Prabhupada was in his sitting room and he saw one devotee, brahmachari. He was young, tall. He was just walking around in the courtyard. He's chanting his rounds. So at that time in Vrindavan, or Mayapur, but Vrindavan in particular, if you saw a white-bodied person, he was ISKCON devotee. There was no one else there in Vrindavan. If there was a white Vaishnava, he was ISKCON. He was a Prabhupada disciple. That's all there was. So Prabhupada sees one of his disciples walking around in the courtyard. He rang his bell. I went in. He said, "Who is this? Who is this boy?" He was a young boy. I said, I don't know, Prabhupada. He said, "Call him." So I called him. We went in together. So now we're sitting in front of Prabhupada, his little sitting room. His bed's also right there. And Prabhupada looks at him and he says, "Where are you coming from?" Most devotees, especially if they came to India, you knew they were sent there by Prabhupada or arrangements made. But this devotee seemed like, we would say, like a freelance devotee. And the devotee said, "Oh," he said, "my godbrother and I, we've been in South India preaching." And Prabhupada looked at him again and he said, "And what are your plans after Kartik, after Vrindavan?" And he said, "We plan on going to Vietnam to preach." And Prabhupada's eyes got very big. He said, "Vietnam, acha." Vietnam, of course, was for us American boys was very famous. We were all getting sent to Vietnam. It was a war going on. There were so many people going to Vietnam. They had the draft system in the USA, which some devotees were would leave the country to avoid this draft so they didn't have to go to this war in Vietnam. So many people were getting killed, so many soldiers, American soldiers, Vietnamese people, children, mothers, everybody was getting killed there. So when Prabhupada heard him say that, he became very excited. He said, perhaps you should take sannyas. Prabhupada already had planned. He was giving sannyas to some of his disciples. But here was this unknown man. I say man, he was all of 20 years old at the most. And when Prabhupada said that to him, he became surprised. And Prabhupada saw his surprise and he said, well, he said, you should go to Rupa Goswami's Bhajan Kutir, he said, and you chant your rounds there. He said, and you pray to Srila Rupa Goswami. And then you come back and you tell me what you think, what he says. So then he did that. He came back the next day. And then Prabhupada said, you go to Krishnadas Kaviraja's Samadhi, which was also there, Rupa Goswami's, or at the courtyard, Radha Damodar temple. He said, you go there and pray. So in this way, he kept sending him to these different samadhis to chant his japa and to pray. So finally he came back and he said, yes, Prabhupada. He said, I think you should take sannyas. So it was him and his godbrother. So Prabhupada said, okay. He said, we will have initiation ceremony on Rasa Yatra evening. It was nighttime, going to be evening ceremony. He said, you tell my secretary, Shama Sundar was secretary. He said, you tell him to take you to Loi Bazaar, the famous Loi Bazaar, and buy you fresh cloth and bamboo for your danda. Yes, Prabhupada. So after that, he went to Shama Sundar and he told Shama Sundar. And Shama Sundar laughed. He said, Prabhupada didn't tell me anything. He said, you're not getting sannyas. He said, I have list right here. Everyone's getting initiated, second initiation. You're not on this list. And he said, no, Prabhupada said. This was a famous, Prabhupada said, I'm getting sannyas. He told me to come to you. So Shama Sundar went back to Prabhupada to make sure that this was true. And Prabhupada said, yes. Prabhupada was giving sannyas, like I said, to Guru Kripa, Yasodananda, and I think Rupanuga at that time, maybe Satsarup, Hridayananda, I'm not sure. There were many right there at Radha Damodar temple in the courtyard of Srila Rupa Goswami. This was very amazing. And Prabhupada was doing this in front of anyone that would come to Radha Damodar. These American boys and girls, we were just molechas. They never regarded us that we were, most people didn't see us as Vaishnavas. They just saw us as some fabrication, that Swami Maharaj had done. He turned these Westerners into devotees. But they were lesser devotees. They weren't devotees. They weren't Indian born. They weren't born in Brahmin families. It couldn't be the same. They weren't qualified. I said when we would go, when Prabhupada's disciples, we would go shopping. Even the shopkeepers, we had our rupees, but they wouldn't even take the money from our hand. They would just tell us to put it on the table. Because they didn't want to touch. We were untouchables. They didn't want to touch us even. The money they would take, that they didn't have a problem taking. Still to this day, they have no problem taking our money. They're millionaires, these shopkeepers in Vrindavan. But they didn't consider us real Vaishnavas, But Prabhupada did. He was proud. He was proud of his Western disciples, and he wanted to show everyone. He was proud of the fact that this movement, Lord Chaitanya's movement, was being spread all over the world. It wasn't a pride for himself. It was pride for his spiritual master, for Bhaktivedanta Thakur, for Lord Chaitanya, the 6 Goswamis. They had done all of this. and somehow Prabhupada was carrying out their wishes. So he was very happy doing that. So that night, of course, we had the ceremony. Big fire yajna was going on. All these devotees, Brahmin initiation, sannyas initiation. And when we came back to Prabhupada's quarters, he looked at the devotees and he said, Rupa Goswami, he has attended this yajna. Prabhupada would say that at different times. Sometimes he would say when there was a kirtan early, like in 67, 68, he would say Narada Muni has attended the kirtan. So he said Srila Rupa Goswami has attended this initiation ceremony. Later on, he didn't say those things. But in the early years, he would say these things. He would say he saw these different personalities there. They would come. So this was the potency of Srila Prabhupada, the potency of his Hare Krishna movement. When he was going to get these boys, when they were getting sannyas, when the other devotees heard, they became upset. They said, who are these people? No one knew them. They were unknown. They were Paramahamsa. Their names were Paramahamsa and Parabhajakacharya. So they were natural sannyasis. So Prabhupada gave them sannyas because of their idea to preach in most difficult circumstances. Of course, they tried to get visas for Vietnam, but that never happened. You couldn't get visas at that time to go to Vietnam, tourist visas, because of the war going on. But they did wind up, they got visas and they went to Iran when the Shah of Iran was there. So they set up in Iran. And Parabhajakacharya, his method in preaching, he became yoga teacher. He started teaching yoga practices. And one of his students was the daughter of the Shah of Iran, who was in power at that time. So he got very connected. Of course, it was a few years later that the Shah was overthrown in a revolution. So that all ended. And then Parabhajakacharya went back to America. So this was in the late 70s and the early 80s, and he actually became a big yoga instructor on the videotapes called VHS tapes, or some of the first tapes that were out there in recorders. So he became a very big practitioner of yoga in that way. Paramahamsa, a few years later, he became Prabhupada's secretary. And him and we became very good friends. He was like me. We were both similar natures, so we became very good friends. He traveled with Prabhupada. After Prabhupada left, he wound up in California, Northern California, somewhere in the mountains, a kind of a reclusive person. And to this day, he's still there. I visited him a few times, and we always sit and talk about Srila Prabhupada, our time with Srila Prabhupada. So these times in Vrindavan, of course, Prabhupada being there for that whole month was very, very special. And when we arrived there, see, my training, the first thing I had to do when I became Prabhupada's servant, besides massage, was I had to learn how to use his cooker. Those of you who follow Srila Prabhupada, you'll know he had his three-tiered cooker, brass cooker. So as I said last year, about this time last year, May of last year, we had a festival in Los Angeles, California, New Dwarka. They have a Prabhupada festival every year. There's some videos you can find of that. So this last year at this festival, they invited some of Prabhupada's cooks. So 7 of us were there, myself and Kasalya, Palika, Shruti Rupa, who's the French one? Kishori, and even, what's his name? God brother. Harikesh, even Harikesh came. And yeah, Shruti Rupa, I mentioned Harikesh. So 7 of us were there, all of Prabhupada's cooks, talking about cooking for Prabhupada. And Prabhupada's cooker showed up. So the first day there, I had the cooker in my hands, and I said, this cooker, I said, became my best friend when I was with Prabhupada. Huh? Because as I was massaging Prabhupada, before I started the massage, I would set up the cooker, just like Prabhupada showed me in the very first days. There's three-tiered cooker. On the bottom, you would make dal. And then in the center section, of course, there were holes in the two upper sections. You put vegetables in there in the middle section. On the top section, there was a container. You would put the rice in water, so it would steam the rice. So in this way, when I was massaging Prabhupada, the cooker was in another room somewhere, sometimes even in another building. And it would be on a very low flame because Prabhupada's massage was like an hour and a half. So whatever was in there was cooking for a very long time. So you had to make sure you didn't burn it. Anyway, somehow or other, I managed the cooker. But as soon as we got to Vrindavan, I didn't have to cook. I had no idea. Because when we arrived there Prabhupada was in his sitting room, and on the other side of the veranda, as all I saw was a screen door, but inside the kitchen was this devotee lady, Yamuna. So Yamuna was there, most famous, most wonderful devotee and cook in the movement. So she was cooking Prabhupada's lunches, so I didn't have to cook. I was just doing the massage and responding to the bell each day. So all day I would sit on the veranda. The whole month of Kartik, I sat on the veranda and I chanted 64 rounds a day. That was the only time for during Kartik and Vrindavan. It was the beginning of my service to Prabhupada. And maybe it helped me stay with him longer that I was chanting so many rounds in Vrindavan during Kartik time. So the very first day, because it was my busiest time of the day, so I got done massaging Prabhupada. I laid his clothes out. I would arrange everything on his desk to put his tilak on. And then I just would sit on the veranda and I could see right into Prabhupada's sitting room. So after he would dress, he would put on his tilak, and he would sit up. Prabhupada always sat very straight. He was saying Gayatri. Then he got up, he would leave the sitting room, and he would walk right past me on the veranda, and I would just offer obeisances as he walked by. I could see his feet walking by, and he would go into the kitchen. I had never been in the kitchen yet. It was our first day there. But of course, I was curious. I could see Jamuna through the door, through the screen door, sitting on the floor. This was unheard of in the West, that kitchen to be sitting on the floor. But she's sitting cross-legged on the floor, and in front of her, there's just a bucket. That was the stove, a bucket stove. It would have little coal or little wood, and towards the end, it would just have a cow dung patty, and the chapatis would be cooked on this cow dung patty. So for me, this was unimaginable, but I could see it going on, through little dark, but through the screen I could see. So I'm sitting on the porch for about 5 minutes on the veranda, and I just became very curious. Prabhupada had gone in there to take prasadam. So I got up and I walked over to the door. I could see Jamuna sitting down, rolling chapati for Prabhupada one at a time. So I just opened the door to peek in. And I didn't know what I would see, where Prabhupada was, how big the room was. I didn't know anything. But it was just a small room, almost like pie-shaped. So I peeked into the room. And of course, just 2 meters away in the corner, Prabhupada's sitting there on a straw mat. He's got a little choki in front of him, and he's taking prasadam. So of course I became a little startled. And Prabhupada looked at me and he said, "Have you taken prasadam?" I said, oh no, Prabhupada. I said, after you're finished, I said, take with the devotees. And they said, come, sit down, take prasadam. So I said, of course, I refused. Later on, I learned you never refuse your spiritual master. You never refuse Prabhupada. If he says to do something, you just do it. Even if he's giving you something, it's actually offensive to refuse any request by the spiritual master. But it didn't seem like a proper thing to do, to eat with him. It never happened again, 2.5 years, except if we went to life members' houses. So I just had this instinct that I shouldn't do it. So I just said no. So he said the second time, he said, come sit down, take prasadam. And again, I refused. I said, no, I'll take what my godbrother's Prabhupada. He said, come, take prasadam. I said, yes, Prabhupada. Again, that was 3 times. There was many stories involve Prabhupada saying something 3 times or doing something at the 3rd time. Never goes beyond 3 times. By then, you better listen. Except right next to Prabhupada. So I went in and I sat down beside him. And within a minute or 2, Jamuna has little choki down in front of me. She's got another thali, 6 katuris in it, dal, rice, this sabji, that sabji, this sabji, a little raita. And she brings me hot chapati right off of the stove, or bucket stove. And I'm sitting at this place that Prabhupada said is the very center of the spiritual world. And I'm sitting next to him and I'm taking prasadam next to him. I never realized at the time how wonderful it was that he gave me such an opportunity. Never happened again, but it happened. It happened that one time. And then I put my hand, grabbed the chapati, just like Prabhupada. I had seen him so many times. Grabbed a piece of chapati, broke it off, grabbed a little sabji, put it in my mouth. And I realized I didn't know how to cook. I thought I was cooking, but when I tasted what Jamuna was preparing, it was a whole different level of prasadam, right from the spiritual world, just like you would expect to get in Vrindavan. So for the next 15 minutes, and Prabhupada doesn't say one word taking prasadam. He's just honoring prasadam. And he does it very elegantly, very practically, chewing. See, Prabhupada, I always say you would watch Prabhupada chew his prasadam, very thoroughly. So now the 2 of us were taking prasadam. She's bringing him a chapati, then she'd bring me a chapati, back and forth. We started to run down on a little sabji. She'd be putting more sabji in there. So this went on for 15, 20 minutes. We're both taking prasadam silently. Jamuna's serving us both so nicely. And then, of course, after some time, it was finished. And Prabhupada looked at me. He said, so? He said, you like the prasadam? I said, oh, yes, Prabhupada, very much. Of course, I did. It was wonderful. And then he smiled and said, good. He said, tomorrow you cook for her. So that was Prabhupada. There was an instruction in there. Not that she was serving me so nicely. He said, so now tomorrow, he said, you cook for her, you serve her. We know he explained so many times, this is Vaishnava, we call each other Prabhu. So we don't just accept service from one another. We have to be eager to serve. So I never cooked in Vrindavan at that time, not for Prabhupada, not for Jamuna. She wouldn't have it, but Prabhupada made the point. The point was very important. And of course, Jamuna, she was married lady. She was wife of Guru Das. I was a brahmachari. Prabhupada didn't make these distinctions. This is why Krishna consciousness was successful when Prabhupada went to the West. he treated us all the same. He didn't treat the women differently than the men. He didn't treat the grahastas differently than the sannyasis and the brahmacharis. We were all just his servants. And if we were capable of doing something, he would have you do it. If you were qualified, everything was based on qualification. So because of this, everyone was eager to serve Prabhupada because everyone felt that connection. Everyone felt that love that Prabhupada gave, not just the men, not just the brahmacharis and the sannyasis. We all felt like we could serve Prabhupada. He gave us the facility. Myself, I was with Prabhupada for 16 months as a brahmachari. And then I left him on my own. I got married. 8 months later, I was with him for another year as a grahasta. He never said, and now you're grahasta, you can't travel with me. He made arrangements for my wife and my child to be in Los Angeles at that time. He didn't speak about them. He just had me do my service. One thing that was interesting, the second time I traveled with Prabhupada started in the very same place, New Vrindavan, started in the very same way. Janmashtami festival in New Vrindavan. 2 years later from the first time. That first time was September 72. The next time was August, September 1974. And at that time, Brahmananda was his secretary in 74. And he, very same situation. It was the day before Prabhupada left. I had no idea. I never even thought I could be his servant again. And the day before Prabhupada left in 1974, Brahmananda came up to me. He said, so, he said, you want to be Prabhupada's servant? And I said, where's he going? Because my only anxiety was Prabhupada going to India. When I was in India with Prabhupada in those 16 months, I had malaria twice, I had jaundice, I repeatedly had dysentery, I had colitis. So I wasn't very healthy in India. So I was afraid to actually go to India. Even I was with Prabhupada, I was afraid to go to India. So that was my question. I was a rascal. So I said, well, where are you going? And of course, he gave me that answer. He said, we're headed to India. He said, so do you want to come? Prabhupada didn't have a servant. His servant while I was away was Satsvarup Maharaj, who was with him for about 6 months, 7 months. And then he left Prabhupada. So he came to New Vrindavan in the same way with no personal servant. So Brahmananda said it to me, and I was standing before him, and I thought about my situation in New Vrindavan, was married. And then I looked at him and said, yes, I'll come. So I rejoined Prabhupada that day, and it wasn't by Prabhupada's request. Prabhupada didn't get involved in his personal caretaking. He left that up to Krishna. Prabhupada's business was serving Krishna. He didn't think about being how he could be served. That was not his, not what he was concerned about. That was whatever Krishna arranged, that's what he would do. So Brahmananda made the arrangement. So then we went in, and just like the first time, Brahmananda said, SrutaKirti is going to be your servant. And Prabhupada just looked at me and said, He never even asked me what I had done over the last 8 months. 8 months I was away. He didn't say, where are you? How's your wife? What's it like? Nope, just became his servant again. He had his business to do, and I was able to help take care of that so he could do his service. So it was very interesting. It was interesting to be with Prabhupada, the way he saw things. He saw everything in connection to Krishna, everything in connection to our service. What was important was our service. When I traveled with him, the only way I knew that he didn't feel well was generally before lunchtime. He would call me in the room, and he didn't say, I don't feel well. He would say, you can make khichdi for lunch today. That meant he didn't feel well. He would say, my digestion, something not right. He said, so make khichdi for lunch today. So that meant he didn't feel something was off. But he didn't complain about his bodily situations. You didn't go in his room and have him say, oh, I have such a headache today, or I have a fever, this is upset. No, it was always about his service. Whatever was going on, that was fine. That's just, as long as he could do his service. Here in Vrindavan, one morning, 1 o'clock in the morning, he rang his bell. Very rarely, over 2 years with him, he rang his bell before 5 a.m., maybe 5 times in 2 years. And it was usually around 1 o'clock in the morning. So this morning, it was about 1 in the morning, and I hear the bell ringing. I get up, right next door. I'm right next to his sitting room. I come in, offer obeisances, and Prabhupada's sitting in the middle of his sitting room. He's not behind his desk. He's right sitting on the floor in the middle of the room. And I offered obeisances, and I sit up, and he looked at me, and it wasn't like a smile, almost like a smile. And he says, these mosquitoes have dethroned me. He said, and I can't do my translating work. So again, it was about his service. It wasn't that I can't sleep because of mosquitoes. It was, I can't do my translating work. These mosquitoes are bothering me. He said, so what can we do? So of course we wound up getting big mosquito net. So every night before I took rest, we would put a mosquito net around his sitting area. So in the morning, he would get up and he would climb under the mosquito net, and then he would do his translating work. So this was Prabhupada's mood. Service, always about service. So, how are we? Everything okay?
Yes, Prabhuji, it was so nice. You just feel it will go on and on. So wonderful to hear Prabhupada.
Thank you,
Mood.
thank you. We'll do again tomorrow, but if there are some questions about anything, Hare Krishna.
Yes, sir.
Do you have anyone has any questions they could ask at this time?
Hare Krishna. Does anybody has any question? You can raise the hand.
Yes, Prabhu. I have one question. Can I
Go
ask?
ahead.
Okay. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you so
Hare
much
Krishna.
for sharing these pastimes. This is so relishing to hear about Prabhupada.
Thank you.
Prabhu, my question is that you said about how do we come to know whether we are like diluting a principle versus making an adjustment. So how do we develop that intelligence? So I'm still clear on that.
Well, the process is there. We chant Hare Krishna and we read Prabhupada's books. Prabhupada always would say so often, the answers to all your questions are in my books. So, of course, in having association with those, you know, Prabhupada said Krishna consciousness is common sense. He wrote in one letter, it's common sense. He said, and if you don't have common sense, find someone that does. So in this way, and I was with Prabhupada, I was with him a long time, and sometimes he would ask me questions. And it was always during massage. That's when I actually had my most association with him was during massage. If he was eating, I was running back and forth. So the only time I was really with him alone was during massage time in the early, you know, late morning or in the evening time. And so sometimes he would ask me my opinion about things. And whenever I would give my opinion, at the end, he would always say, you have good understanding, you know. But my understanding developed by being with him. it wasn't even my understanding, it was my understanding of his understanding. I would try to understand how Prabhupada saw things, not how I saw things. And this is the business of a disciple, is to understand your spiritual master's desire and try to fulfill that desire. I'll give an example. And this is, I was with him for 2 years. After I was with him for 2 years, and we were in Mexico City. There's one boy here now in the temple. He lives in Mexico City. He's stuck here in the temple. I haven't been there since I was with Prabhupada in 1975. They keep trying to arrange for me to go there. We'll see if it ever happens. But anyway, in 1975, we were there, and Prabhupada, he would take his morning walk in like botanical garden. Prabhupada always, he walked on the beaches or he walked in parks, nice parks. So this was a very beautiful park. I think Mexico City is about mile-high city as well. It's little high, little cool. So we're on this morning walk, and there's a dozen of us with Srila Prabhupada. I'm next to him. I'm holding the microphone. Whenever Prabhupada speaks, I would record. And as we're walking, as Prabhupada would sometimes do, he would stop very abruptly, and he pointed to a tree with his cane. He had his cane, and he pointed to the tree with his cane. And he said, the tree was dead. So Prabhupada said, why has the tree died? These were common things in the morning walk. Prabhupada would put questions. Another thing I learned very early on, if Prabhupada asks a question, let somebody else answer. Because whoever answers, you're wrong. No matter what you say, you're going to be wrong. It's just how things seem to go. So I learned that early. So of course, I don't say anything. And immediately, sannyasi, GBC, Prabhupada, he said, it became diseased. Probably became diseased. And Prabhupada had that, he would make that look on his face and no. So then another devotee, Prabhupada became old, died of old age. Prabhupada shaking it. He's enjoying it, you know, his disciple, because he knew us. He knew how we saw things. He knew how we thought. He wanted to change our perception, especially these morning walks. He was always trying to have us see things from the proper, through eyes with knowledge, how to see things from a spiritual platform. So I'm next to Prabhupada. Now they've already said, basically, you know, we have birth, old age, disease, death. So they've already mentioned old age, disease leading to death. But Prabhupada's saying no. And I'm right next to him and I'm thinking, what does he want to hear? I'm not thinking on my own. I'm thinking, what is he thinking? So then I said, Prabhupada, I said, the spirit soul is left. And then he smiled, said, yes. So that's, you know, we learn things by association from the pure devotee, from how he sees. That's what it says, how we get our intelligence through the eyes of knowledge. We get our knowledge through the pure devotee. We get our devotion through a devotee. You can only get devotion through a devotee. You can only understand Krishna consciousness through a pure devotee. So that's why Prabhupada said everything might fail. The temples can fail, the society can fail, but my books are always there. And that's what ISKCON is. ISKCON is Prabhupada. It's not a bunch of buildings. We say this devotee is in ISKCON, this devotee is not in. No, ISKCON is International Society for Consciousness, Krishna consciousness. It doesn't matter, you can be in a temple and just be a nonsense. Huh? We see that sometimes in temples all around the world. It's a very nice place to live nowadays, temples. When we joined the temple, we gave up everything to live in a temple and live a very austere lifestyle, work 16 hours a day. eat prasadam off of the floor, sleep on the floor. This is not how we were raised. Now people come into the temple, you know, it can be exact opposite. They were sleeping on the floor, eating on the floor. Now they go in the temple, they get their own room, they get a cell phone, you know, they're in charge of collecting donations. It's not austerity. That's not an austerity. We have to find how to serve nicely, how to do something for Prabhupada. Then he becomes pleased. Then you get understanding of what Krishna consciousness is. Otherwise, what are we understanding? We have a nice life as a devotee. That's not the goal. Prabhupada said devotee and comfortable life, they don't go hand in hand. Devotee looks to struggle for Krishna. Yeah. So yes, that's how. It's all by the mercy of spiritual master, by doing something.
Yes.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna.
It's a wonderful. One more hand
Sure.
as reserve. Yes, Amit Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. Prabhuji,
Hare
I have one question. You discussed about one Mataji. So she's the same Yamuna Mataji who lives in guest house Vrindavan, or some other Mataji?
No.
Yes, Jamuna. I didn't. Too late now. Jamuna Guru Das's wife, one of the very early devotees, joined in San Francisco, 1967. That Jamuna. So her and Guru Das, they were first president in Vrindavan. Guru Das, so Jamuna was there. So yes, that Jamuna. She left some years ago. She's famous. She made so many cookbooks, Art of Vegetarian Cooking, different cookbooks.
Thank you,
Okay,
Prabhuji.
So, did you have a
One
specific
more.
question?
Yes, one hand. 1 second, please. Rinji Mataji, yes, go ahead.
Yes. Hi, Krishna Prabhuji. Thank you so much.
Speak louder, Mataji.
Okay. Hi, Krishna Prabhuji. Thank you
Yes,
so much
that's
for
good.
such a nice lecture.
Hare
Just wanted to have one query. You said that there is austerity is required. So wanted to know to what level the austerity is required, because many times I have seen devotees, they are very, they perform very high level of austerity. So like if I say about myself, I am like a zero in austerity. So wanted to know to what extent this austerity is required. Hi, Krishna.
Okay, the austerity that Prabhupada gave us basically was to help him in his mission. Prabhupada, ISKCON Society is preaching mission. So somehow or other, we chant our rounds, we follow the principles. And I mentioned so many times, I say when someone would see Prabhupada, he didn't ask you if you're chanting your rounds, if you're following the principles. He said, what are you doing? In other words, what are you doing to help spread Krishna consciousness? This is a devotee. He wants to give devotion to others. So that mainly, if we want to call that that's our very life, is preaching. Prabhupada said, he would quote his spiritual master, says, preaching requires life. And preaching is the very life of the devotee. So that requires, that's an austerity sometimes, had to get out there, because it's not always easy thing. People don't want to hear. People are, now of course, who knows what people, everyone's sitting home, they want to do so many things. They want to just go outside. But we find ourselves, we also have the need to speak. I hear it in Vrindavan, many of the years I've been what they call the MC for Prabhupada's appearance day or his disappearance day. And there'll be 100 Prabhupada disciples at these festivals. And they'll have 3 hours of memories speaking about Prabhupada on his Vyas Puja day or his disappearance day. So 3 hours is what? Not even 200 minutes. And there'll be 100 devotees. So you say every devotee has 2 minutes to speak. And then you see what happens when they start speaking, Prabhupada's disciples. Prabhupada's disciples are preachers. Once they start speaking, they never stop. This is how we were raised. We were raised to do service. That is, the austerity is just to give up your comfortable lifestyle and do something for Krishna, do something for Prabhupada. So just like now, for me, it's expanding as well. The week, Saturday, 2 classes, Sunday, 2 classes. Now during the week, others, they want to have classes. So for me, I think, you know, sometimes you become tired, but I know also it's my service. And when you're offered the opportunity to do something, you do it. You know, that's because what happens from what I see, if you're offered service, but you say, no, I'm busy, or no this or no that, pretty soon you're not going to be offered service. So the opportunity to serve, we should see, is coming from Guru and Krishna. So they're giving us an opportunity to do something, you have to grab it. So that's the real austerity, is just to set aside our comfortable lifestyle, our easygoing, and do something for Krishna. That's the austerity Prabhupada wanted. It wasn't so much about eating, of course, sleeping. He said no more than so many hours. Eating, he always talked about these things, but practically when we were young, he told me time and time again, you eat whatever you can digest. He said, you need your strength to do your service. So the real austerity is doing service, not all these so many other things. Like Nirjala Ekadasi's. Prabhupada was interested, you eat as much as you want on Ekadasi and go do something. Get out there and preach, go distribute books, you know, go do classes, do something. Otherwise, you know, what are we doing? Just sitting, and then we tell everybody I'm following Nirjala Ekadasi. I'm very austere. And as soon as you do that, you lose all your austerity. As soon as you advertise your austerity, it's all gone anyway. So main thing is somehow or other to help Prabhupada.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. I think it's already 8:45. We don't want to take too much time. It is so wonderful, Prabhuji. I can't tell you. It's so wonderful, and we feel so fortunate to hear from you, Prabhupada pastimes. Thank you so very much, Prabhuji.
Appreciate it. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow.
Yes, Prabhuji. Yes.
Okay, very good.
Yes.
Thank
Hare
you.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Jai. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.